It was already incredibly unfair, and no amount of reducing testosterone, will ever level the playing field.
The results of sports where men and women do the same distances, swimming, running, other sports, any child can learn that within 30 seconds.
Men are not losing their trophies and their opportunities all over the place, it's just not happening. It's only women that are expected to give up their opportunities.
The claim that, we're not quite sure if male-female performance gap exists and blah, blah, it's just nonsense.
There is not a single piece of peer-reviewed science in the world that shows you that you can remove all male puberty advantage or even all male advantage. So we're going against all the science.
I suppose we should just do a brief kind of run through of why we're at where we're at today. I've been reading around this subject in preparation for this event and was kind of surprised, I guess, to find that between the 60s and the 90s, anatomical sex testing was pretty normal in most sports. It was abandoned in the 1990s in favour of this thing called gender. From the 2000 Sydney Olympics onwards, there were no tests other than self-identification. And then from the mid-2000s onwards, you probably all know the story, there was a steady increase in the number of people self-identifying as transgender, seeking hormone therapy and surgery, some undergoing medical transition, but some not undergoing any kind of medical transition at all. The popularity in recent years of the idea of non-binary and non-operative trans identities, which require no medical intervention, has inevitably led some of those people wanting to become athletes. So, only this week on Sunday, we saw Henry McLeven, who won the Oregon women's 5,000 metre junior varsity race by over 2 minutes. On Monday, Liam King won the women's fixed gear race at the Oakland Grand Prix in Livermore. Naively, I suppose, I thought a conclusion had been reached at the moment when we found out that swimmer Leah Thomas, who you've probably all heard of, was not going to be able to compete under the FINA rules. But clearly that was not the kind of seismic shift in sport that maybe some of us lay people saw it to be. Where are we at now? What is the state of play of women's sport?
Leah Thomas, 6'4", certainly helped us in the world of swimming. I mean, we shouldn't have to have a Leah Thomas in every single sport, but that's almost what it seems to be. It was a ridiculous situation. This was a 6'4" male who really was a distance swimmer, and not a terribly good one at that, was very much in the 500s in college swimming. So this isn't, 500s in the world. This is just 500s in college swimming in America. So really quite, an average male athlete who transitioned and then became NC2A champion, beating 3 American Olympic silver medal freestyle swimmers, and with a terrible stroke and a terrible start and, terrible splits and, just everything that was possibly could do wrong, because it was a little bit like Mo Farah going in and winning the 100. I mean, that's how utterly ridiculous it was. And everybody in sport knew it, and everybody in swimming, absolutely knew it. And they also could look at splits and see that, that they were slowing down where they should have been speeding up, and that, that it was just not a genuine, proper race. And everyone in sport knows when you're talking at this level, the differences are minute. And you have to look at the marathon yesterday. Yeah. Oh my goodness, wasn't that amazing? They won the marathon by thousandths of a second. So we're winning international races by the smallest margin, and we're going to give away 10% to someone who's biologically male and say that doesn't matter. And it was just so galling, because obviously, having lived through the East German era, where we had the East German state doping their athletes, making a massive difference to their female performances, not so much to the male performances, but to their female performances. They could take an average athlete, improve them by, on average, 9% and make them, world record holders and world champions literally within the space of 2 years. And they were giving these young girls drugs from the age of 11, which had huge negative side effects on them, but they didn't care. It was just the East German system, East German men in grey suits wanting these girls to be, to go out there and win medals for them. And obviously I saw all of that. So when this started to happen again in 2015, and the IOC decided that they would throw women's sport under the bus without even talking to a single elite female athlete, and yet they brought trans-identifying males, average trans-identifying male athletes, to Lucerne to talk to them, to give them evidence as to why they should be in women's sport, but didn't speak to a single female elite athlete. I just couldn't believe that they were going to do it all over again. So that's why I just couldn't stay quiet. I mean, I just couldn't. So yeah, it just wasn't fair. And obviously, some sports are much bigger than 10%. So the average is about 12%. Probably middle distance running. Distance running is probably the narrowest.
Running is 10 to 12% at elite level, but below elite level, and as you age, the gap gets bigger. Yeah.
But, weightlifting, it's 30%, and something like boxing, a male will punch a female 160% harder onto a less dense bone structure. So when we had 100 males in men in the women's FA game in this country, a large proportion were in goal. Because, of course, they were much taller with bigger hands and much more dynamic, and they could make a massive difference by being in goal. So, it was already incredibly unfair, and no amount of reducing testosterone, will ever level the playing field. And we have a thing called a Q angle, which is the angle between your hips and your knees. And that's nearly 50% more in a woman for obvious reasons, for childbirth. And that means that you can be so much more power can be brought through, from your lower body for running, cycling, anything really, where you're going to be, even kicking on freestyle in the swimming pool. That's never going to be removed either.
So you noticed that there was a kind of fallacy in the science here, that they'd actually someone was misreading the science somewhere.
Well, there was no science. So they employed a trans-identifying male scientist to prove that 11 men should be in of which the one person out of those 11 who self-reported that they got slower as they got older, surprise, surprise, the one that actually said, I started training and I got better, they took them out as an outlier and didn't even include them in the results.
You're one of the early people in this debate to be getting involved and actually questioning whether or not this was scientific.
From the moment they said it, I just thought, I cannot sit here and watch another bunch of young women lose out on what is potentially their life-changing opportunities because women's sport is being thrown under the PC bus as disposable.
I suppose you had the backing of your own experience there, that you could actually call upon this prior experience of the doping of these German athletes. Mara, how did you enter this debate?
So in 2017, 18, 19, I was following this debate, but my father was really ill, and any spare time and energy I had beyond sort of work and everything else you have to do in life, I sort of had to look after him. But then in 2021, a few things happened at the same time. So I saw a tweet from Sharon which said, if you are silent in this, you are complicit. And Maya Forstater won her appeal, and Laurel Hubbard qualified for the Tokyo Olympics. And I reached a point where I thought, I can't stay silent any longer. A female weightlifter is not at the Olympics. It took me 24 years from having a dream as an 11-year-old to standing on the start line at the Olympics. And I just thought, this is just so wrong, I have to speak up. And as soon as I sort of entered the debate, I kind of couldn't leave.
It's clearly still a very vital question, though, one that, the likes of me, who is not, involved in sports in any way, thinks, well, now that Leah Thomas' question has been answered, that's it, we're in the clear. And I guess, you're actually still in the trenches very much.
But that was answered for aquatics. So aquatics, then went to their major conference and voted on it. And even with the obvious situation with Leah Thomas, it was still 70%. There was still 30% in that room that knew swimming inside out that thought that it was okay for Leah Thomas to be racing, women. I mean, that's atrocious. It really is. I don't believe anybody that voted for that position should even be there. They should have been gone instantly. And anyone that's voting for it now on a board doesn't know the first thing about sports, so should they not be on any sports board? It is really, really frustrating. I mean, obviously, the hardest part of the early years that Mara's talking about was the no debate. I mean, God, it was just so difficult to even be able to present the science, and get people to actually look at the facts and the statistics. The obvious nature that the reason we have different categories across sport is to give people opportunity across society. And the biggest difference is male and female.
To learn about male advantage, all you need to do is look at the history of, let's say, the marathon or the 100 metres or an event where men and women do exactly the same thing, and just look at the differences in times. You don't even need scientific experiments. I mean, in things like how much power can you put onto a ball, yes, that needs to be measured in a lab. But the results of sports where men and women do the same distances, swimming, running, other sports, any child can learn that within 30 seconds. The claim that, we're not quite sure if male-female performance gap exists and blah, blah, it's just nonsense.
What are you seeing in the real world that actually brings this to life?
There are a lot of men competing in the female category in parkrun. Parkrun had sex categories, male and female. people will tell you they didn't, but I've seen documents in which they talk about sex from previous years. And then 2019, they decided on self-ID. And at the beginning of this, I sort of thought, well, personally, I don't have a problem with being female, but I can understand that for other people, their sex may be a big problem for them. And, I accept that other people may feel like that. So these 2 additional categories they brought in, another gender identity and prefer not to say, I kind of thought, well, that's a reasonable way to accommodate people who really, don't want to declare their sex. But then what I saw was loads of men not availing themselves of those third categories and instead going in the female category.
World Aquatics, when they did their conference and they turned around and decided to protect the female category, they put a trans-identifying category in our first World Cup in Berlin that year, and not a single trans athlete turned up. So it has absolutely nothing to do with wanting to compete or be included. It's all about wanting to win. It's wanting to have an unfair advantage in the women's category. Because we only see it one way, right? It doesn't go the other way. Men are not losing their trophies and their opportunities all over the place. It's just not happening. It's only women that are expected to give up their opportunities.
What are the advantages that someone has gone through male puberty? Because clearly we are differentiating here male to female versus female to male, transgender
well,
identity.
It's all the things that we just mentioned. So,
yeah.
It's nothing new that you don't know about. I mean, there is a big biological benefit to having more testosterone in your system, even from when you're first born,
So this actually is, because the next question obviously is, what happens if someone takes puberty blockers, doesn't go through male puberty?
I mean, it may reduce some of the benefits, but it still gives them an advantage because they will still have that Q angle that I mentioned earlier, which will not go. And we can show you through documentation and statistics that 8-year-old boys can run faster, jump higher and throw things further.
So different levels of hematocrit, hemoglobin, greater muscle mass,
capacity.
lower fat percentage, bigger heart, bigger lungs, Q angle, etc. So the differences between male and female before puberty, Greg Brown has done good studies on this. There's something like 4 to 7% in athletics. So the gap is smaller than after puberty, but it is still significant.
Is there any way with the technology we currently have and the hormones we currently have access to fully obviate the kind of male advantage?
Well, as I just said, you can't. You can't remove the Q angle, so you will not be able to remove the shape of someone's hips. So if they're biologically male, they will have a narrower Q angle, which enables them to put more dynamism between, from their legs. They will be taller. They will have bigger hands. There is lots of things. So there is not a single piece of peer-reviewed science in the world that shows you that you can remove all male puberty advantage or even all male advantage. So we're going against all the science.
If we accept that we're going to do sport, how are you going to organise it? In order to have a competition, a category has to consist of at least 2 people, because if there's only one person, it's not a competition. So you have to have at least 2 people in a category. So then, how are you going to do those what are you going to use to demarcate those categories? And it has to be something which is relevant to sport. It can't be, if you demarcate by religion or political views or your hair colour, this makes sport meaningless. You have to do it by things which are relevant, and we all know what those things are. It's sex, age, weight in some sports, type of disability. So that, if you go right back to the beginning of what sport is, and you decide how you're going to categorize, okay, then if you're going to have 2 or more people in one category against, 2 or more people in another category, inevitably there's going to be a certain level of unfairness because we're all unique. But you try and make that unfairness as minimal as possible so that you can have some kind of fair and safe competition. And also another model I use is, okay, do we agree that humans should do sport? I think everybody would say yes, even those who hate sport. They might say, okay, other people like it, they can do it. Okay, who are we going to say can do sport? Is it everybody? Is it only white people? Is it only men? Is it only people who vote Labour? I think the answer is everybody. Everybody should be, if they want, allowed, enabled, encouraged to do sport. And then the question is how? how do you do it fairly and safely? And the answer is categories, because that's the only way you can do it. So when people say, "Oh, you know, it's all unfairness always exists," you have to go back and ask, you know, what sport actually is. Yeah, and also I think if you the whole backbone of sport is fairness. It loses its entire meaning if you say, okay, you know, let's just accept some unfairness. Why not? So yeah, I think if you remember those things, then logically you arrive at categories.
And decades of sport has worked out what those best categories are, you know, so we've got there. We know what they are. There really isn't anything else that you can do. There is nowhere we can move from where we are. This gives the best opportunity to the most number of people across society to have opportunities in sports. And if all of a sudden you say that men can identify into the women's category, 51% of this world lose their right to have fair and equal and safe opportunities in sport. And that's what they've done. Literally like that. They just went, there you go. And then you 51%, you don't matter. Your fairness don't matter. And what really bothers me the most is this would never have been allowed to happen to men's sport. And it's the same reason that the East Germans were allowed to beat the women during the 70s and the 80s, because it didn't affect the men. That cannot happen. You know, we live in a world of equality where women should have the same equal opportunities. Sadly, we don't. You know, women get 5% of the sponsorship dollar in the world of sport. 95% of all the money in sport goes to men. We already get a tiny little piece of the cake. And then in 2015, we were told we couldn't even have fair sport anymore. It's outrageous that it's been allowed to happen. And that so many people, you know, that should know better in the world of sport have sat back and done nothing. And I am the most disappointed and the most upset by people that are supposed to be running sport who know and who will speak to me privately and tell me that they understand and that they're on board, and they do nothing. Because they protect their jobs and they protect their salaries, and it makes me mad.